Somewhere in human history, 10 men walked the earth who were so violent, so ruthless, and so terrifyingly effective at war and conquest that entire civilizations still remember their names with fear, centuries later. Some of them built empires larger than anyone thought possible. Some of them turned killing into an art form. One of them is still, by some estimates, responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people and reshaped the DNA of an entire continent in the process. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly who they were, what made them so dangerous, and why, even thousands of years later, we still can't stop talking about them. Let's start the countdown. Number 10. William Wallace. In the late 13th century, Scotland was under brutal English occupation. Most people in Wallace's position would have kept their heads down and survived. Wallace did the opposite. After English soldiers killed his wife, Wallace didn't just seek revenge, he organized a full-scale rebellion. At the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297, Wallace did something that should have been impossible. He led a poorly equipped Scottish force against a far larger, better-armed English army, and won decisively, exploiting the narrow bridge to funnel the English into a killing field where numbers meant nothing. Wallace was eventually captured and executed in horrific fashion, hanged, drawn, and quartered in London, as a warning to anyone else who might resist English rule. It didn't work. His death turned him into a legend, and decades later, Scotland won its independence, partly because of the resistance movement he helped ignite. Wallace makes this list not for the size of his conquests, but for proving that a single determined, dangerous man could make an empire bleed. Number 9. Hannibal Barca. If you wanted to invade Italy in the ancient world, you did it by sea, or through a heavily defended mountain pass. Hannibal did neither. In 218 BCE, this Carthaginian general marched an army including war elephants directly across the Alps in winter, losing nearly half his forces to the brutal cold and terrain just to reach Roman territory from a direction nobody thought was possible. Once in Italy, Hannibal proceeded to hand Rome one of the most devastating military defeats in its entire history at the Battle of Cannae, surrounding and annihilating a Roman army nearly twice the size of his own, using a tactical double envelopment maneuver so effective that military academies still study it over 2,000 years later. For over a decade, Hannibal terrorized the Italian countryside, and Rome, the most powerful military force in the ancient Mediterranean, was utterly unable to stop him in open battle. He's on this list because he didn't just win battles. He proved that raw brilliance and audacity could bring the most powerful empire on Earth to the brink of total collapse. Number 8. Tamerlane, also known as Timur. In the 14th century, a warlord emerged from Central Asia, claiming descent from Genghis Khan, and set out to rebuild that same level of conquest through sheer brutality. Tamerlane's campaigns across Persia, India, and the Middle East are estimated to have killed somewhere between 15 and 20 million people, at a time when the entire population of the world was a small fraction of what it is today. Tamerlane didn't just conquer cities. He made examples of them. After capturing Delhi, tens of thousands of prisoners were reportedly executed in a single day. In other campaigns, Tamerlane's armies were said to have built towers made entirely of the skulls of the defeated, left standing as monuments outside conquered cities, a deliberate, calculated form of psychological warfare meant to make future resistance unthinkable. He walked with a permanent limp from an old injury, which earned him the nickname Timur the Lame, but there was nothing weak about the terror he inspired. Entire regions of Asia never fully recovered their pre-Tamerlane populations. He earns his spot on this list simply because of the staggering, almost incomprehensible scale of destruction one man was able to orchestrate. Number 7. Vlad the Impaler. You already know his legacy even if you don't realize it. Vlad III, ruler of Wallachia in the 15th century, is the real historical figure who inspired Bram Stoker's Dracula. But the truth about Vlad is, in some ways, more disturbing than the fiction. Vlad earned his nickname through his signature method of execution: impalement, a slow, agonizing death by which victims were driven through with a long wooden stake. Historical accounts, some likely exaggerated but many well documented, describe forests of impaled victims left outside his capital as a warning to invading Ottoman forces and domestic enemies alike. One famous account describes an Ottoman invasion force retreating in horror after encountering a field of tens of thousands of impaled bodies left by Vlad's forces. What makes Vlad genuinely dangerous, beyond the horror of his methods, is that they worked. His reputation for extreme theatrical cruelty repeatedly deterred invasions from the far larger and more powerful Ottoman Empire, protecting his small principality through sheer psychological terror rather than military strength alone. Vlad makes this list because he understood something dark and effective. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't an army, it's your reputation. Number 6. Attila the Hun. By the 5th century, the Roman Empire had survived for hundreds of years, absorbing invasion after invasion. Then Attila arrived. Leading a confederation of Hunnic tribes out of Central Asia, Attila built a nomadic empire that stretched from the steppes of Asia to the borders of Gaul, and both the Eastern and Western Roman empires were forced to pay him enormous tributes just to avoid outright invasion. Attila's forces were built around devastating mounted archery, hit-and-run tactics that European armies built around slow, heavily armored infantry simply had no effective answer for. Roman writers described the sheer terror his approaching armies inspired, entire cities emptied of their populations at the mere rumor that Attila's forces were near. He earned the nickname Scourge of God, a title meant to suggest that his conquest was less a military campaign and more a form of divine punishment being unleashed on a corrupt world. Attila died suddenly in 453, reportedly from a nosebleed on his wedding night, an oddly undramatic end for a man who had brought two empires to their knees. He makes this list because, for a brief, terrifying window in history, the most powerful civilization on Earth had no answer for him at all. Number 5. Leonidas I. Most of the men on this list are dangerous because of the sheer scale of what they accomplished. Leonidas earns his place for the opposite reason. In 480 BCE, facing an invading Persian army numbering, by ancient estimates, in the hundreds of thousands, Leonidas positioned a force of roughly 7,000 Greek soldiers, famously anchored by 300 elite Spartans at the narrow mountain pass of Thermopylae. For 3 days, this vastly outnumbered force held the pass, using the narrow terrain to neutralize the Persian numerical advantage entirely, inflicting devastating, disproportionate casualties on Xerxes' forces. When betrayal finally allowed Persian troops to outflank the position, Leonidas made the decision to stay and fight to the last man, buying critical time for the rest of Greece to organize its defense. The Spartans lost the battle, but the delay and the myth of impossible resistance it created became a rallying point that arguably saved Greek civilization from Persian conquest altogether. Leonidas earns his spot on this list not through conquest, but by proving that a small enough group of sufficiently dangerous men could make even the largest empire in the world pay an unbearable price for victory. Number 4. Alexander the Great. By the age of 30, Alexander had conquered essentially the entire known world from Greece to the borders of India, without ever losing a single major battle. Trained from childhood by Aristotle himself, and taking command of the most formidable military machine of the ancient world from his father Philip II, Alexander wasted no time proving he was, if anything, even more dangerous than his father. At the Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander defeated a Persian force several times the size of his own through sheer tactical brilliance, directly targeting the Persian king Darius in the chaos of battle and shattering the morale of the entire Persian army in the process. City after city fell, not just to his military genius, but to a reputation for ruthlessness that often convinced defenders surrender was the only survivable option. When his own soldiers, exhausted after a decade of continuous campaigning, finally refused to march further into India, Alexander reportedly wept, not from relief, but from frustration that there were no more worlds left for him to conquer. He died at just 32, having built one of the largest empires in human history through a combination of military genius and utterly relentless ambition. Alexander earns his place on this list because he redefined what one dangerously brilliant, dangerously ambitious man could accomplish in a single lifetime. Number 3. Miyamoto Musashi. Unlike nearly every other name on this list, Musashi wasn't a conqueror, and he never commanded an army. He earns his place through something arguably more terrifying on a personal level. He is widely regarded as the single most dangerous individual swordsman in recorded history, undefeated in over 60 documented duels, many of them to the death across early 17th century Japan. Musashi's most famous duel against the renowned swordsman Sasaki Kojiro has become legendary. Musashi reportedly arrived deliberately late, using the delay to psychologically unsettle his opponent, and won using a wooden sword he had carved himself from a boat oar, defeating one of the most feared blade masters in Japan with what was essentially an improvised weapon. Musashi later wrote the Book of Five Rings, a treatise on strategy, psychology, and combat still studied today, centuries later, by military strategists, martial artists, and even business executives. He makes this list because he proved that a single human being, armed with nothing but skill, discipline, and an almost inhuman understanding of psychological warfare, could be more dangerous in a one-on-one encounter than entire trained armies. Number 2. Spartacus. In 73 BCE, a former Roman soldier turned enslaved gladiator did something the entire might of the Roman Republic considered essentially impossible. He organized an uprising of enslaved people that grew into a full-scale rebel army, and for 2 years, Spartacus's forces repeatedly defeated Roman legions sent specifically to crush them. What made Spartacus so dangerous wasn't just his own combat skill, considerable as it clearly was, but his tactical brilliance and his ability to unify an enormous, diverse group of escaped slaves, most with no formal military training, into a disciplined, genuinely threatening fighting force. At its height, Spartacus's army is estimated to have numbered as many as 90,000 people, enough to repeatedly humiliate a Roman state that considered itself militarily untouchable. The rebellion was eventually crushed, and Spartacus was killed in battle, his surviving followers famously crucified along the Appian Way as a brutal warning to anyone else who might consider rebellion. But the fact that a single enslaved gladiator came this close to shaking the foundations of the Roman Republic itself is exactly why Spartacus earns the second spot on this list. He proved that even the most powerful empire in the ancient world could be made to genuinely fear one man. And that brings us to number 1, Genghis Khan. No other name on this list comes close to matching the sheer scale of destruction and empire that Genghis Khan built in a single lifetime. Born Temujin into a fractured, warring collection of Mongol tribes, he spent his early life navigating betrayal, enslavement, and brutal tribal warfare before eventually uniting the Mongol clans under his own singular leadership by the early 13th century. What followed was the most rapid, most extensive campaign of conquest in recorded human history. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, the Mongol Empire eventually stretched from the Pacific coast of China to the edges of Eastern Europe, the largest contiguous land empire ever assembled by a single civilization. The human cost is almost impossible to fully comprehend. Historians estimate the Mongol conquests directly and indirectly caused somewhere between 20 and 40 million deaths, at a time when the world's total population was a mere fraction of what it is today. Entire cities that resisted were sometimes annihilated completely, their populations executed as a calculated warning to every other city considering resistance. This deliberate campaign of terror was so effective that many cities chose to surrender immediately rather than risk Genghis Khan's wrath. And here's the detail that separates Genghis Khan from every other name on this list. In 2003, geneticists studying Y chromosome data across Asia discovered a genetic marker so widespread and so specifically traceable to a single common ancestor originating in Mongolia around the right historical period that researchers concluded roughly 16 million men alive today, about 0.5% of the entire male population of the world, are direct descendants of Genghis Khan. Think about that. This single man was so dominant, so relentless, and so thoroughly reshaped the world around him that his genetic legacy is still measurably present in millions of people alive on Earth right now, 800 years after his death. No other human being in recorded history has left behind a footprint anywhere close to that scale. Genghis Khan earns the number 1 spot on this list because he isn't just the most dangerous man to ever walk the earth in terms of conquest and body count. He fundamentally altered the genetic makeup of an entire continent, and the world is still, quite literally, living with the consequences of his existence. 10 men. Different centuries, different continents, different weapons, different methods. But every single one of them shared something in common. An almost incomprehensible willingness to use violence, brilliance, and terror to bend the world to their will. Some of them built empires, some of them tore empires apart. All of them proved just how far a single, sufficiently dangerous human being can reshape the course of history. If this countdown kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into the most dangerous figures history has ever produced.